So let's get started. Our roundtable is dedicated to the payment interfaces. Present here are excellent panelists: Alexander Aivazov from Rostelecom. We have Alla Bakina. We have Vladimir Komlev from NSPK. Andrey Malinovsky. Alexey from Mastercard. Andrey Protopopov. I'm a little bit worried to see such an authoritative panel. The topic of our roundtable was chosen in order not to do some probing of that topic prior to the conference. We listened a lot about what is going on with interfaces now, what will happen in the nearest future. We tried to look beyond. In essence, when we actually were drafting these documents, 2030 seemed to be very far away. But actually, this is only 10 years which separate us from that milestone. If we get a little bit back, we'll find ourselves in the year 2009, 2010. I tried to remember what was going on in 2010, what happened to interfaces, and colleagues will correct if I'm wrong. But if my memory doesn't fail me, we had some tests and experiments with QR codes. We had no Apple Pay, if you remember, 10 years ago, because everyone believed that we'll have NFC payments promoted by GSMA. We even had customized Nokia mobile phones, which were issued for the sake of the tests. At that period of time, we had the boom of e-money wallets, and we had online banking, which was very much different from what we may see now in terms of the functions, easy to operate, etc. But still, that situation shows that within 10 years, we can predict something, that the situation may get worse or may get better. But the situation with interfaces looks a little bit strange. In terms of the products, we understand it very well what the consumers need. They need cheaper loans, high-rate deposits, faster payments with no commission to be paid, etc., etc. But the interfaces, this is something which we invent ourselves. No users approached us saying that I don't want to insert a card into the payment terminal. I want to press it against the terminal. So it means that we bear all the responsibility for the interfaces. This is a big question sign, which I will divide into smaller questions. The first question goes to Alla Bakina. The most important thing about the future of the interfaces. Now we have a whole zoo. We have contactless payments from a mobile phone, card. You may use online banking. You may use e-wallets. You may use sound and voice assistants. And for instance, even a vehicle can be used as an interface to pay for refueling. Will this picture remain the same? Will it develop? Will we have more and more interfaces, or its number will shrink? Thank you so much for this question. Really, if we look into the future, bearing in mind the pace of our development 10 years, this is not the future. This is actually something which will happen very soon. Judging by what is going on now, we have all the reasons to assume that the number of interfaces will not shrink, and we will see more additions to the existing interfaces. There will be more and more interfaces and different combinations of them. I do believe that to some extent there would be different integrated interfaces complemented by voice assistants, which you have mentioned. Different biometrical features would be added, and the infrastructure will be integrated as well. I think that the versatile connector would be open source API. Summing it up, I do believe that we will see the diversity of interfaces, and this diversity will increase. Okay. I would like to address the same question to Alexander, but let me elaborate on that a little bit. Act as the user. Do you need such a diversity of interfaces, or you can do without such a big number? Thank you so much for that question. Really, the topic is clearly very interesting. If we look, and I will try to look through the prism of the user at what Alla has said, an interface. This is something which is determined by the behavioral model, and this behavioral model actually brings about the synthetic interfaces which may arise. As the user, I need several simple things. There should be some system, some infrastructure which would have an access to my payment instruments or facilities that I could set certain rules for the payments, meaning I have to be able to develop kind of a formula, or the system will poll me, will ask me from what account, from what card to make this or that payment. All these interfaces which I'm using in certain products, they have to be secure and safe. And the biometrical technologies, the double authorization and authentication systems are very handy. So as a user, I would value security and easiness. So this will determine which interface I'm opting for. I will associate myself with what Alla has said. I will say that there will be many more interfaces in the future, because right now we see the so-called synthetic interfaces. When in the framework of the same user's path, you may opt for the same simultaneous scenarios or consecutive QR code combined with the direct transfers from the account to account, from the card to card, with the use of banking applications and without them. And sadly, once the technologies evolve, we will see more and more behavioral patterns which will actually trigger new interfaces. You know that very well that in future even a vehicle, an automobile, may become a payment interface. But let me go even further, actually. There will be even no driver inside. And that means that there will be another synthetic interface which is called not only the payment for this or that transport, but payment following certain rules. That's quite rational. I even didn't have that we'll have a driverless payment interface, meaning that actually the vehicle will have itself to go to the gas station and refill itself and pay tips to the man at the gas station. My question goes to our next speaker. QIWI was regarded as the very first interface company. The company which had not only the terminals, the wallets, but they also had cards, the payment from the mobile phones. So the same question goes to you, Vladimir. In terms of the user's experience, is it good or bad that we have multiple interfaces? Probably we as professionals enjoy that, but users cannot make anything out of that. Thank you so much. In essence, we actually agreed not to speak about the future, but let me say a few words about the present when we speak about the payment interfaces, especially numerous interfaces. It's very important to understand that whatever mistakes can be done, if the users have a little chance to make a mistake, it will happen. The simplest case, for instance, the payment for the mobile services using a terminal. Just insert 500 rubles into the terminal, and that's it. We added a new provider, a Skype, so a different provider, different button. But there would be a big number of users which would push the same button and would actually dial their own phone number, believing that they're paying for Skype. The innovative stories which we bring about, we have to be very cautious about that, because people are used to something, and any changes actually are fraught with mistakes or maybe certain risks. To follow up what's been said about subscription and seamless payments, users very often ask that question, as long as the merchants. Why, for instance, my card is pegged to App Store and App Store has written off certain money. Actually, I didn't want that, but once the number of subscriptions goes up, and once cards are pegged to different stores, the users will have more and more question how to control that, how to understand where I can steer it. Another challenge in future would be about giving opportunity to the users to do that. Bear in mind that today, for instance, they are using the cards of different payment systems, different accounts, different banks, and the users would value flexibility and user-friendliness. I will associate myself with what Alla has said, that open API will be very helpful. They will actually help the users to understand what's going on with their money. As a financial market, if we do not do that, the alternative would be about major platforms such as social media and Facebook, which will try to address that problem instead of us. Facebook tries to do that along with Libro. This is the step forward for them, and I do believe that we have to offer such a solution to the market, that the platforms and other stakeholders do their own business and we do our business. Thank you so much. Let's have a look at a specific case, and we will narrow that a little bit on purpose. Vladimir, if we look at the interface from the top level, I am using two interfaces. In any shop, I'm paying with a card, but once I have to pay my bills or to transfer money to my friend, I'm using online banking. So in essence, we have two independent streams, POS and how I debit the rest. In your opinion, is it good that we have two interfaces, or we have to bring those two interfaces together, and the FPS actually will reduce the number of interfaces to one? I would divide the interfaces following different principle, the ones which we notice and which we use consciously, and the ones which we do not notice, and once actually the interfaces act as an integral part of something else. The less noticeable the interface is, and the less attention the client pays to certain payments, transfers from a wallet to wallet to the corresponding account of a bank, etc., etc., I think that would be better. That should remain unnoticed, and we are fighting for the services. Look at the automobile. Actually, it doesn't matter how the payment is going to be done, but it matters actually how the vehicle is going to communicate to the gas station, how it's going to select the type of the gasoline. Actually, payment done by the vehicle with the driver or driverless is not a question right now, because this is just a commodity, electricity within a socket, which has to be there. And this is up to the professionals to take care of what is going there, whether it is account-to-account payment or anything like that. But getting back to the interface, I think that the main struggle would be around the servicing. The payment should fit very well with the service which is being offered. The interfaces themselves, I think, should not be divided into the ones which are done through the mobile banking and the ones which are done through the through the card, but rather the payments which are done consciously and unconsciously. Actually, the person just pushes a button and probably would press his finger against the reader, and that's it, meaning that the person does the payment totally trusting the system and the terminal, because this service is very good, and he uses that many times. Or I have to take a card out of my wallet or take my smartphone out of the pocket and press that against the interface. This is the second type of the interface. I think that certainly we will move in the direction of doing all the payments subconsciously without noticing that. This is what moves the progress forward. Laziness is the main driver of the progress. The less actions we have to take, the less clicks we have to make, then the faster we are doing the payments. And this is what lies in the domain of interest of those who are selling to us everything, starting from gasoline to the air tickets. Remote or online shopping actually would again facilitate such faster payment systems, and those who are developing these interfaces for us will do that. Steve Jobs actually once said that a man doesn't know what he wants. We have to do that to him and to explain that to him. So interfaces will minimize the number of clicks and will be very unnoticeable. But I still do believe that there will be enough interfaces where actually you will have to do payments consciously, face-to-face, on the cash desk, or when you transfer money from your account to another man's account, and you will have to act on purpose or consciously, and that's good. I would pass the same question to Alexey. If you are familiar with bullets, actually, this is our Eastern-style bullets, ninja payments, the payments which no one sees. Alexey Malinovsky, can you tell us about the ninja payments? And can you also tell us about one more thing which worries me a lot? Fast payment, that's good, but from the ethical standpoint, doesn't it mean that we are going to cheat? Because actually when the payment is done with no man's will it mean that people will spend more? We're speaking about our happy future, which will come in 10 years' time. I had very good weather-focused specialists, and actually they say that the most accurate forecasts are done either for the next summer or for what may happen in 5 years' time. But it is very difficult to make an accurate focus, an accurate prediction for the day after tomorrow, for instance. So let's deliberate on that. I totally agree with what Vladimir said about unnoticeable payments. More and more payments are going to follow this ninja style, ninja payments which we do not notice, but which we do. I not exactly agree with one thing which he said. When Vladimir says that the user, and remember before we used to have the word cardholder, now we are speaking about the user or the consumer. A consumer is a more accurate word because they consume our services. The consumers of the services do not want to know everything about the service, what it is about, but there will be no cheating. The consumer can understand that he trusts the service provider, and the brands which are familiar to him in terms of his previous payment experience, will guarantee the fact that this payment will be not only unnoticeable, but even secure. The consumers want everything to be safe, secure, guaranteed, simple, and consistent. If we think about our future of the payments, if we speak about the cars which will pay for the parking, the fridges which will pay for the food delivery, but at the same time the same shops probably may offer the format when there will be some biometrical face recognition, and there will be some technology installed which will understand that the smartphone which you're holding in the hand and the biometrical data which are being offered will identify you as a person, and therefore a payment would be absolutely seamless but even more secure than the one which we have at the moment. And as Mastercard, we pay a lot of attention to such technologies, and therefore several years ago we acquired a number of companies. Some of them are dealing with the artificial intelligence, which by means of the throughput analytics may understand whether you are really intending to make such a purchase. And there is another company which analyzes your behavior related to the mobile gadget, for instance. It turns out that the way we are holding the phone, for instance, we're typing the text or pressing that against our ear, these are totally individual features. And even prior you identify yourself, we may understand with a big probability that, for instance, a PIN code or password which you type in is being introduced not by you, but by someone else who has stolen your mobile phone. And once we have a biometrical identification, a similar system will support necessary level of security and will guarantee both to you and to other stakeholders the fact that you are identified as yourself, that the payment will be done totally securely, and the payments will be invisible and noticeable, and it will not undermine the trust to the system.
And if we talk about invisibility, I would allow myself to make a joke about our dedication to talks about QR codes, QR present, QR non-present, and no matter what else can be. Basically, if we have a look at Russia, 80% of all the terminals have FNC. And no, 78% according to our data, according to the recent data. They already have this data. We never argue with the central bank. So 78% then, and we are much more used to not making a photo and after that entering an application. For us, it is more ordinary to put a smartphone to a reader, and I think that invisibility of payments is more connected with such passive activities than with an active work with QR codes, as I see it. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think I would like to address my question to the audience. I think the majority of us pays by putting the card or a smartphone on a reader. Please raise your hand, those who always check the sum of money which is stipulated in the receipt. So who controls that? So the majority of us doesn't control that, so we just put our smartphone on a reader and that is it. So we trust too much. Yes, but people are becoming financially literate, so that's the point. And they do know that if the sum is incorrect, there is opportunity to argue that afterwards. And we have been conducting a survey to understand which part of our citizens do control their expenses, and there are 45% of them. I think the majority of them also exaggerate their opportunities. So I think among those 45%, 48% pays with the use of non-cash methods. So that's half of them. So I think the majority of people exaggerates their capacities. So I think when you tend to ask them more precisely, you see that their control is not that serious. And a couple of years ago, my European colleagues shared an interesting case with me. And before that, fine payment for speeding was a punishment. As it is, you had to have your receipt to go to the cash desk and to make this payment. And it was not about the money you had to pay. It was more about the procedure because it was too long and too boring. And now this punishment is facilitated because the payments are quite easy. And now we have dwelt upon interfaces and the amount of them, but we can't imagine any modern conference without the topic of machine, of robot insurrection. And Alla, I would like to address my question to you. So all interfaces are quite silly at the moment. We are to make decisions for them. I have Apple Pay and I have 100 cards there. And every time I have to remember which card has bonuses for restaurants. For instance, Viktor has bonuses for restaurants, Tinkoff has bonuses for gasoline stations, and so on and so forth. Are we going to have some interface which will deprive us of these sufferings and make decisions for us and understand which bonuses are where? So yes, we do need them, and we see the emergence of them in some spheres, and we see smart assistance in financial markets. We have advising functions, and I think that after that, taking into account the variety of tools, instruments, and different channels and means, this function will be introduced there as well and will provide us assistance there, because all the suppliers are trying to improve our life. And I think that the first milestone they take as a role model are themselves, because they understand what their needs are and they test those developments and robots on their own needs. And so I'm sure that it will be used and it will be enhanced further. And it's very important to understand, to remember that when we discuss the variety and the amount, it's very important to have simultaneously with the growth of those intellectual capacities, increased trust on behalf of users to all those instruments and opportunities, and all the cornerstones which are to be attached to this trust have been enumerated already. Everyone wants to feel protected. Everyone wants to feel that nothing happens without his consent. And of course, financial literacy, I can't but mention that, because there is no point for a person who doesn't know how to use his smartphone to propose some innovative things, because it will simply eliminate trust after 3 operations and he will use only cash. But maybe a wallet is to think instead of him and will be doing everything properly. So let us move further. I would like to ask Andrey, and I would like you to give me a brief answer. Your competitors are experimenting with smart interfaces in Yandex Money. They have a card which is paying abroad, for instance, and making this choice itself. Do you have any plans to have such smart interfaces as well? If we talk about competition, then it's clear that payments are becoming a commodity to a large extent, and everyone is able to provide them. So what is important is the following. We need to have the holistic use case which is chosen by a user, and why does he choose one of those alternatives. For instance, if he has cash, but he needs to pay for an online game, so he has to go to the terminal, and after that, to make this payment, then he will use QR code, and after that input the number of his wallet or card. It doesn't matter that much, because the value is created by the use case in general, or if he pays by installments, so these installments are important for him, but not the method. So what we're trying to do is undoubtedly connected with the use of all the market opportunities and the tools which are provided by it in the technological scope. And we're trying to find such use cases which provide higher value than an ordinary payment is. And we have been discussing that already, and we are focusing on that. And now I would like to ask Alexey and Vladimir to say a couple of words about their plans. And you personally, as users, are you interested in smart interfaces, or are you pretty okay without them? So I know too much about them. I don't have such plans now. We do have such plans, but I won't tell you about them right now. Great. At least that's frank. So good. We're coming back to you, Alexander. So let's have a look. Your structure, your institution is a holder of a great amount of heterogeneous kind of information, and you're basically an operator of personal information of our citizens. So is there any point to cover everything else by payment interfaces, for instance, ID cards, passports, pension cards, driver licenses? Is there a point to have everything covered by this system, or is it too dangerous and too frightening, and so it's better to separate apples from oranges? Well, that's a very interesting question. As you see, my Google Assistant has started to operate when I said thank you and OK to you. So I will start answering your questions, starting from the first. Of course, the presence of different intellectual robot systems which allow a user to make decisions quickly, efficiently, and cheaply, where to use different financial tools, loyalty systems, and so on and so forth, is, of course, a cool vector in direction. But the point is that first, the system which will be providing such a service to a user, so to say, we do understand that this system is to have access to all the information about the user by default, about all his habits, his behavior, and also about the amount of money on accounts, because it needs to make a decision basing on the amount of money which is on different accounts of a user. And of course, we had to propose to understand that this system is to have a huge amount of guarantee that nothing will happen to this information of a user. That's one point. And the second point is that if we have a look at the financial sector, how do banks compete? They compete with the use of different products, loyalty systems, the synthetics and combination. And if we assume that this function will be delegated by a user to a certain intellectual system, which will be choosing what to use itself, when, and in what amount. So to a certain extent, it is quite a dangerous path to a certain limitation of competition, because why is it dangerous within the framework of one commercial institution and one commercial entity to create such a platform? Because in fact, it's a kind of a gateway to a man in the middle. So that's a mediator between a person and a service. So all questions connected with security, guarantee, trust also result in questions connected with ethics and competition in the market. And when we are thinking about the expediency of attaching the data you have mentioned to the system, different social cards, medical cards, transport cards, data about education. So in two steps, we will just come up to a decision that it is to be on the basis of a kind of a state service, state sector. I like that you have mentioned the word simple. Yes, because by default, if you are a citizen of a country, you have to trust your state. If you do not trust your state, you change country you live in. And so it turns out that if we pursue the way of globalization of such a format we are discussing right now, unfortunately for someone, in a couple of steps we will come up to a conclusion that we have to have everything in a unified system for which state is responsible for, no matter whether it's governmental or it's joint stock company which is toughly controlled by the state. But it's not that cool to discuss, because then all of us have gathered here in vain, and we are developing our market in vain, because if the result is like that, then there was no point in our activities. And I would like to say that undoubtedly payments, conscious and unconscious, will be changing in terms of the balance they have, and that balance, this balance will be conditioned by the emergence of new products, information, new level of information security, new level of interaction with the user. For instance, 10 years ago, to have some transaction, you had to sign 10,000 papers. Now you need to press only 5 or 6 buttons, and maybe at some point you will just need to wink, and that will be enough for a transaction to happen. So all those products and their synthetics are evolving in compliance with the emergence of new user and customer ways, which are conditioned by new services and products. So to conclude what I have said, undoubtedly, we can create such a system, and it can have everything you have mentioned integrated. And I think that we will find this system within the scope of governmental services, and I don't think that it's that good from the standpoint of private business development and other aspects as well. Vladimir? I'm trying to attach this question to the practice which is compiled in our payment system and in others, when card chip can have several applications attached to it, payment application and several others. But let us understand that any application is not more than an ID of a physical entity in a certain system. And of course, I'm absolutely against having such combinations like a combination of e-passport together with bank. That's an awful proposal, because these are different systems with different level of security. And I'm talking about a state ID card. That's the first part. And the second part is financial ID with its own level of security, with its own level of execution. We can't combine them. But let us imagine that a person has his student card or payment salary card, and for instance a person uses this bank, this organization, when he works in a certain company or studies at a certain university. So we can give him an ID as of a student, as of an employee, as of a user of this swimming pool or this outpatient clinic, and that will be enough for him to have facilitated access. If we assume that we have advanced outpatient clinics which work without queues and paperwork, then why not? So we can have logic combination of, because it is not the top level of security which is needed, for instance, for a passport. And so these IDs can be allocated on your card. And this card is operated as your salary card or as your student card, and it is enough for you to interact in terms of financial issues and services with this particular university or this particular employer, and sometimes with this particular football club. For instance, if you're a loyal fan of this football fan, hockey fan, yeah, and the hockey fan as well. So it seems to me that if we are not talking about the level of top security and verification as passport, as ID, as your basic identification of a person, as of a citizen. So I think if we talk about smaller, closed type systems, I think this bank system can be used as a very comfortable ID instrument together with different applications. It is in demand because millions of students in Russia have second application on their student cards, for instance, to visit a library or a gym. And so millions of students, we're talking not about dozens or hundreds of thousands, we're talking about millions of students. These are campus projects and salary systems are also becoming more and more popular. So I think it can work somewhere where we have a good logical combination and compliance on the level of carriers and organizations, level of organizations you are interacting with in terms of financial and other services. So why not? And Alla, I wanted to ask you, could you please comment, and I will ask you a short question. You're just blurring interface a little bit. So if we have a number of other IDs on the card, a number of other applications on a card, then you're not the one to regulate them. So I can just support my colleagues, because I really think that it's really too dangerous to have all databases in one place and to have only one entity responsible for the safety of this data, and to have all the possible functions on one carrier, on one card, which really need different level of protection and of access. So if we talk about personal data and everything which is connected with that, for instance, something we call a digital profile, then it is expedient to organize on a state level, which will provide top security and protection level. But if we talk about users and the ones which provide different combinations for them, then there is a need for an opportunity to have a kind of a module system, to have flexible, tailor-made services with an opportunity to have interactive amendments of different parameters, and to have this kit assembled on one carrier or on two carriers. So we're just imagining the future. So I think it is a kind of a real story to be. So you hope that our users will be really working with this Lego system, with this module system, not the user. We are talking about different hands we will have, a human being will have. People need to have an opportunity to choose. For instance, someone would like to have their paper passport with them and to do everything manually, and they also have to have such an opportunity if they would like to. I would like to argue with Alla, but after that I remembered that we never argue with the central bank, so I will argue with Vladimir then. And if we talk about such systems, when one chip has financial and non-financial applications attached to it, so I'm sure that it's not about the future 2030, it's not about present, it's about the past 2015, 2016, and the best example is University in Kazan, a huge project, and all the participants had their ID written on a payment card. They were paying with that. They were using that for their access to the stadium. So that's a kind of a practical experience. Of course, we need to separate apples from oranges, as I have said, and it is for the state and Rostelecom to define what's the better way to do that. But if we talk about day-to-day simple decisions, we have such an instrument in place, and it is already working. And if we're talking about the overall way we have made since 2015 up to 2019, data provided by the central bank in terms of the increase of non-cash payments is the better example of the fact that users, citizens, card holders, consumers have made their choice. What is more comfortable for them and what is more reliable for them. I think that's very important to preserve the level of trust and security on all the services we will provide.
In the essence, this is a very important statement. I think that sometimes the state forgets about that. Even let's look at our discussion. Let's take the commissions from the banks and give them back to the retailers. And we even forget who contributed to that cashless payments as a person who attended lots of committee meetings dedicated to the cashless payments and different instructions to ban the cash payments and the cash. I may say that without the payment systems, this all will not be imaginable. Let's speak about practical things. We started with saying that we are the ones who invent interface because we like that and we would like to make our users happy. But this is very expensive, Andrew. When you are improving your interfaces, How do you want to monetize your expenditures? For instance, you have developed a new wallet. I think that people will pay more and more frequent, and you'll get more commissions. What's the beef? I would divide that into two parts. First, this is a question about clients' retention. If you do not meet the market expectations and what the users are used to using other services, you'll be lagging behind, and in that case, you'll just losing clients. This is a mandatory requirement in order to be present in the market. For instance, it is quite hard to retain clients without Apple Pay on the one hand, but on the other hand, as I already said, we try to have a wider view. We go beyond the interface of the payment system. We offer an extra value to the clients. Because once this added value arises, then certainly you will cover your costs and you will monetize on that. You will benefit from that. You will profit from that. For instance, we give our wallet users an opportunity to use API in order to manage this wallet, but in some cases, this is quite useful to some of the users. It requires some input, but if we understand why they need that, because they want to automate the interaction with a wallet through a mobile application, probably not from the website or from a certain interface, some other way, but it gives them added value, and we may charge certain commission for that service, or actually will benefit from that turnover. If we understand the added value, then in that case, we can monetize on that. The same question goes to Alexey, because the paradigm which has been mentioned, when actually first we waived, then we pressed it against, etc., this paradigm cost several $billion on the replacement of the hardware and the software. But in order to make that question more difficult to answer, that would be a very tough question. This is my favorite question, which I address to the audience. Sadly, everyone likes better to press the card against the scanner than inserting that into the terminal. Everyone likes to press it. But will you let the providers monetize of that? Are you going to pay more for this opportunity to press, for instance, the card rather than inserting that? 0.5% for that transaction. 1, 2, 3 people are ready to pay more. Okay, 0.1%. Are you ready to pay 0.1% for pressing the card instead of inserting? Okay. Alexey, that's why actually it will be more difficult for you to answer that question. Still, my answer would be very simple. Let me rephrase your question. Who would like to use the cards for the public transportation to have it contactless? I do think that everyone would like to press that instead of inserting that. But in terms of monetizing, each of the card holders doesn't think about that. They're not paying for that. These are the banks and the payment systems, the ones who are developing the market. They pay for that, but they monetize directly on the increase in the share of the cashless payments 10 years ago. And this is when the first contactless payments emerged, and within these 10 years, within that decade, we made a leapfrog to 60–65% of wireless payments. And we benefit from the non-cash payments, we benefit from the transactional business, and this is actually much better for our profits and losses report. Well, anyway, we benefit from that. If that share goes up, and even if the share grows to 62-65%, still 40% of the market remains in the realm of cash. So it means that there is a big room for improvement, and there will be more benefits from the digitalization of the economy. Therefore, there is a direct link between our profits and our expenditures. Before, the market where we operated was much less. Now it expands and we benefit from that. So it's a win-win situation. Glad to hear from a person who earns more, especially actually in the country where everyone says that they are earning much less. I wanted to add something. Wanted to mention that. We spoke about the infrastructure, the terminals. Everything is looks very nice, but I worked for acquiring business, and for instance, we have 100,000 terminals, and it looks like a very cumbersome network in which we have to invest. After that, QR code emerged, and regular cash box actually became digital, and overnight this network of terminals totally lost its value. The physical network of communication channels, now once we're living in the age of 4G and 5G, which are secure, which you don't have to lay any wires. However, we treat these communication channels, and probably we take a wait-and-see approach, and we say that NFC is quite convenient, but the market has changed. And the POS terminals no longer have to be present there. And billions of dollars invested into those wires and cables and terminals, they all of a sudden become worthless. And this is an important and not very pleasant factor. My next question goes to Alla, but before that, I'd like to ask Alexander. You shared your comment, and I would like to ask another question to your comment. Look, you become an infrastructural provider of the industry, identification, data sharing, etc. Are you satisfied with the monetization model which you use? And how much you get from simpler identification or faster payment systems? Tell us about that. And comment on what Alexey has said. Thank you so much. Let me start with a comment, and I will answer your question later. I support Alexey in saying that every innovation is quite costly. This is quite risky and it takes time, but every innovation becomes the innovation once it transforms the industry and the economy, when it is beneficial not only for one industry, for instance, NFC, QR codes, etc. Actually, we do not say that it optimized very much the logistics and the user path of the retailers. Before, actually, you had to insert the card, actually type in a PIN code and wait for several seconds. It takes about 15 to 20 seconds. And for instance, we speak about mega malls such as Ashan. 50 seconds of time, this is quite costly. And we are satisfied with today's development because we are promoting some competitive products for the business, for instance, addressing the faster payment systems with authorization and face recognition. On the one hand, we benefit from that, but on the other hand, we create new opportunities, for instance, to set up comprehensive multifaceted products for the retailers, for instance, the product where any payment system is the main bottleneck. This is what everything should end with, and this is the end of the funnel, which has to bring money to the retailer. And the retailer would earn more and we, as the service providers, would earn more too. So benefit from the cashless payments, and in essence, indirectly, it brings about lots of startups and technologies which are there behind our products. This is a global win-win situation, and it's quite risky, let me stress that once again. It would require lots of time investments and money investments from all the industries, because if only one stakeholder develops that technology, regardless of how serious or how strong it is, it will not shape the market. A lot of work has been done by the regulator, by the central bank, by the Association of Retailers, who apply lots of efforts. They are promoting the electronic money. Look, you provided an answer. So once you have given this answer from the outset, our roundtable would look totally differently. Let me make a side comment. I don't think that innovations are costly. For instance, I do not know how much money you spent on QIWI before you reach the break-even point. Now Yandex Money, for instance, $10 million were invested, and I do think that the faster payment system is not too costly against the general backdrop. We can discuss that a bit later. But secondly, you said that the time spent on payment in a supermall matters. When we worked with the GSMA, etc., and we actually spent hours in a very stuffy room trying to invent something, and we invented a retailer, and we said that you will pay only $300 for a new terminal, and the payment actually will work 15 seconds faster. And the retailer said, no, we don't need that, because it takes quite a while in front of the cash desk, and actually they use that time in order to buy more chewing gums or cigarettes or anything like that. That's why independent startups do not survive in the retail. Only once you offer a comprehensive product. Whereas the retailer may save up money or earn more due to some other side products, only then the startup would take off the ground. A standalone startup will never take off the ground. Thank you so much, and certainly we can close the doors and actual debate until the hockey game, but we have to wrap it up. I would like to ask one more final question to Alla, but probably I will also ask everyone else to comment on that. Look, interfaces have always been some secondary product. There's been banking accounts, and they were connected to the cards, etc., etc. Haven't we come to the situation when the interface revolution will trigger the reform and restructuring of the banking sphere? A simple example. Interfaces actually are somehow connected to the banks. Even Apple Pay actually is connected to the card, to the account, and it may be connected to the central bank, to the lending organization, and all of a sudden actually an interface may emerge which will directly be related to the FPS, such as QR code. Will the technological progress translate into the total restructuring of the banking sphere? Well, as a visionary, what you can predict? Well, the restructuring is also already going on. We see new stakeholders emerging, new functions emerge, and new solutions which are offered to our users. I think that we are moving in developing the ecosystem. And I will not underrate the role of the banks. These are fundamental institutions which do not only make payments, but they offer very sophisticated products, and they assess the risk level, and they may address that problem as the lending organization. But once the key point here is the interfaces. Certainly new stakeholders, they emerge, and we'll see a diversity of the interfaces. Whatever is going to back the interfaces will necessitate more modifications. Alexander. Quick question, quick answer. What reform will be triggered by the banking interfaces evolution? I think that once IT companies come to the banking sector, it means that the regulations have to change. And the rules of the game will become equal. Actually, the banks which spend lots of money on that, on the restructuring, and the new companies which were not regulated at the moment, they actually have some easier way of life. Actually, this is what we have already noticed. Vladimir? I think that the two roles of the interfaces, the user interface, and this is something which determines the client's behavior and which makes certain products competitive and non-competitive. They will entail what is going on through the FPS. And they would entail the necessity for the seamless interaction at the systemic level. I don't mean the client's interface, but the intra-systemic change. A standardized interface actually still will be there intact. And this need, and that's good that we do not proceed from the regulations setting up the open banking, but I do think that we will come to that consciously. New services emerge, which for the sake of the client would require such open systemic interfaces of interaction between the banks. And I think that this is what is going to bring about a new shape of the financial services and the financial market. Alexey? I think that if we speak about the short-term changes, we'll see an increased role of the technologies and the open APIs. But if we look at the banking system, which emerged in the 8th century, so the essence of the banking industry is the same as used to be many centuries ago. You borrow the money, you hold the money, and then you pay back. And we'll not see any major changes there, whereas the cornerstone of that is the trust and confidence, which we all are speaking about. That's why, actually, in that sense, I'm not sure that in the long term, in the historical perspective, certain dramatic changes will occur. We're speaking about some technological changes which are taking place now, which used to be 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Yes, please. I will associate my colleagues in terms of what concerns API, open API. This is something which may change the reality, and this is good. This is cool because the stakeholders in certain segments and certain services may make the final product much better than, for instance, if they offer a certain versatile solution, some silver bullet. Once we develop APIs, once we develop the market, and the more stakeholders may offer new solutions based by supported by the financial institutions, it may bring about a win-win situation, whereas the clients and users will get a more customized solution and easier and more convenient to address this or that objective. Thank you so much. I do believe that we have spent a very good 60 minutes. A very interesting discussion took place. Thank you so much. You were nice listeners. I would like to thank the organizers. I would like to thank all the panelists. I'd like to thank the central bank, which took part in agreeing on the topic of that roundtable. And I would like to thank the Mastercard, which sponsored that panel. Thank you.